Hello, and welcome to Forget What You Learned, a place for families to stop and reflect on the modern state of education. We empower you to challenge your own thinking about today's traditional school system and ask the question, are my kids thriving? I'm Corey Greenberg, a parent in the trenches just like you, and I chat with innovators, experts, and other parents who are changing the conversation, inspiring families to reevaluate how we define academic success. This podcast is brought to you by Pacific Preparatory, who is molding education through innovative one-on-one learning for students in today's digital world. Today's episode is for anyone who's ever wondered, could we just take a break from all this and go live differently for a while? I'm joined by Susie Chow, founder of Carpe Diem Traveler and an expert in long-term family travel. We talk about what it really looks like to hit pause on your regular life, take a sabbatical, or travel for a year with kids, and how school, work, money, and even your dog fit into that picture. Susie shares practical tips and honest truths about how families are doing this in a post-COVID world, how programs like Pacific Preparatory help families stay on track academically, and why intentionality matters more than logistics. If you've been feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or like something's missing in your family's life, this conversation might be just the nudge you need. Hello, and welcome to the show. Today, I'm joined by Susie Chow, travel expert and founder of Carpe Diem Traveler. Susie helps families rethink not just education, but their entire approach to life through the lens of long-term travel. In this conversation, she'll share her story of how a Midwest childhood turned into a year-long adventure across all 7 continents, and how that experience grew into a career helping others plan sabbaticals, extended travel, and life-changing family journeys. We'll dive into how to actually turn the dream of traveling long-term with kids into a reality, what the biggest obstacles are, and the different ways families are approaching school while they're on the road. We'll also get into some common fears around gaps in education and re-entry into traditional systems, and how to plan thoughtfully to keep those doors open. We'll talk about growing trend of families seeking more lifestyle flexibility, what international relocation could look like, and why it's not just about the logistics. It's about being really intentional with what you want for your life and your family. Whether you're dreaming about a year abroad, a month-long sabbatical, or even a total reset, hopefully this conversation will leave you inspired and ready to start thinking differently. Hi, Susie. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Corey. Thanks for having me.
You said something in our conversation about today's conversation that is kind of where I want to start, which is that we can't forget the plot. You said that our job as parents is to prepare our kids to be very well-rounded, empathic people, and that formal education is one piece of that puzzle, right? But we also need to consider what experiences, like life experiences, are going to set them up for success and that environment that we create to help them grow. So, I'd love to start with, how does long-term travel play a big role in that? Maybe we can start with your story as an example.
Sure. So when my husband and I traveled for a year, this was without kids. However, it was truly a pivotal experience. Of course, the travel and exploration was a big piece of that, and I cherish those memories. But more than anything, it gave me the confidence and to really be able to do things like start my own business, things that were very off the beaten path or what I even envisioned for my future. I was very much a straight A student, follow the path, get the good grades, get into a good school, get the good job. I was a management consultant for 13 years, and the trip that we did, the year-long sabbatical, that was while I was in management consulting. And by taking that one leap, I realized, oh, I like living off the beaten path and doing things my way, and really creating the life that felt aligned to me and my goals, not what was the stereotypical American dream. I realized I did everything that I was quote unquote supposed to do, and that wasn't bringing me joy and filling my cup. And this experience that I had really lit me up. And that's what eventually led to me creating my travel business in 2016.
I love that. I'm sitting here wondering, like, do you think that it takes a special kind of person to even consider this kind of thing? Like, not a special person, but like a certain personality, even though you were like very on the straight and narrow path, like what was it that got in your ear that was like, I have to do this?
Right. And when it when the idea came to the forefront of my mind, it actually surprised even me. Because what I like to say is I got a sabbatical seed planted way in the back of my brain, and I pushed it all the way back because I didn't think that this was something I would ever do. But the seed was planted in my 20s. I would do a lot of traveling and stayed in hostels as you do, and to save money but be able to still explore a lot. And I would talk to people who were traveling for months or years at a time, and that was fascinating to me. But at the time, I was, a management consultant working with Fortune 500 companies. I was very important. And
Right.
I didn't think that that was a life that was, a life that was for me, because that in my brain, I conceptualized that for either foreigners, where, Australians, of course, they do this all the time. But not Americans. And that was something that was just so outside the norm that I could not identify myself as somebody that would do that. However, what changed was my husband came home one day from work, and he said that the company he was working for got acquired by another company. We had a long leeway, a runway, about 9 months before he would be actually out of a job, as they went through that transition. But we didn't want to relocate. And this is very not like me. I just spurted out of my mouth. It just, that sabbatical seed went straight to the front, like, and out of my mouth. And I said, you can find a new job now, or you can find a new job later. And it took several months to get him on board with this idea because, again, he thought I was crazy. Um, but it was something that I mean, to your question of does it take a certain type of person? I mean, I think it does take a boldness,
Mhm.
to do something that is really not in this norm, not in the status quo, and trusting yourself to be able to figure out all of the details. Although, I help people with this, so you don't have to figure out all the details on your own. There are people like myself that can assist with that, but I think that there needs to be a conviction and a deep desire that wherever you're at right now, that discomfort of staying where you're at, especially if you're feeling stuck and unaligned, that you can take that leap. And yes, there will still be a lot of discomfort because there's so many unknowns and unfamiliarity with this new path that you're interested in. But if you just take it step by step, kind of solving each problem one by one, it's very, very possible.
Yeah. So then fast forward to, there's kids in the mix, right? And, what I think you're describing about just like a general unease or unsatisfaction with life in general. I think there's a lot of families out there that are feeling that, feeling disconnected. Like let's not talk about social media and screens and all that stuff again. But
Mhm.
and issues that kids have in school and feeling like, it's a factory model and like there is a narrow definition of success and like listening to your inner self about maybe this is not what I need to be doing for the rest of my life for my kids. So then like walk me through that sort of realization as a parent might have and like what's happening in the beginning of that
Yeah.
process for the parents.
Yeah, and I do have I have a almost 5-year-old son, and this is something that I really think about a lot as he is, we're just starting to take that first step into the education system. And as you mentioned just now, it's really built with the intention of raising factory workers. And I mean, it's evolved certainly to, I think, fit maybe the jobs that are around right now. However, the jobs that my, soon to be 5-year old are going to have, and those opportunities down the road, 15 plus years from now, we can't even imagine some of those jobs.
Yep.
And so I think that one of the most important factors is how can we as parents create that well-rounded education, where a school and more formal education is a piece of that. But I think that, looking into the future, although it's very unknown, we do know that the world is getting much smaller. The the need to be able to work with other cultures, people from all over the world, that, I think is safe to say that that is going to be an ever increasing skill and necessity for a lot of jobs, maybe not every job, but a lot of jobs. And, again, going back to what you said in the beginning is we would just want to raise kind humans
Mhm. Yep.
with that empathy. And I think that, for any parent who's ever traveled anywhere, even just outside of your neighborhood in a different situation, where maybe things are done differently, and just having those interactions where you realize the way that I'm living my life isn't the only way to live life. And just being able to plant those seeds in their heads while their brain is developing, I
Mhm.
think are so crucial for creating that well-rounded human that is prepared for real life as an adult, who can do their taxes and, all these
Yeah.
things that we talk about, like this should have been taught in school more than calculus. And,
Right.
I still think that there's a time and a place for calculus and the logic of it all.
Mhm.
But I think that if you are listening to this and you're considering, what could that look like as a family, and really looking to mix travel in with education, I think that there's a beautiful opportunity to be able to, not only give them those cultural interactions and, open up their world, their curiosity to new places, new things, but also selfishly as parents, scratch our own wanderlust, because, our mental health matters too. And if you're like me, when I travel, I feel the most alive, the most, one with myself.
Mm.
And my son sees that. I came back from a trip. I mean, he was maybe just turned 4. And this was just a weekend trip into the mountains. I live in Denver. And I asked him, "What was your favorite part of this trip?" And he took a long pause and he goes, "Seeing you so happy." And I
Oh
was
my
like,
goodness.
that
Wow.
that was profound to me. Like,
Yeah.
he could see that just by taking, this weekend trip, that I
Mhm.
was in my element. And I think when you're outside of your norm and, all the to-do lists and laundry and things that you got to do in your house, it's easier to be present. It's easier to be more connected. And that's what it's all about.
And I mean, this is what I'm picturing. Okay, here's me, the cynic with 3 kids, right? It's that sounds amazing for like a vacation, but what you do is not really. I mean, it's a vacation in a way, but you're actually living, and
Mhm.
it could be a month, it could be 3 months, 6 months, or a year. What fast forward to the year, like do have to kind of live your family life. So what is that like? What's the difference between, a weekend in the mountains that's good for the soul and like
Mhm.
what you are helping families plan?
Yeah. I start all of my client work with intention setting. And I think that that's so important because whether it's a weekend away or, a year-long trip, I think you're gonna get so much more out of it if you're clear about what you want from the beginning. Not
Mhm.
only does it make the planning much easier to be able to line up, your experiences and destination with those goals, but I think what's so often missed is that people with any kind of travel really just focus on checking things off the bucket list and I want to see this and do this. That's great. There's a place for that. But especially for a longer adventure, where you might be spending a year, let's say, you need to be clear about why you're doing this because there's
Mm.
going to be a lot of challenges along the way in the planning, but also when you're traveling, that you need to go back and have a very clear why statement that you can rely on. And also I think that can shape what the experience can become.
Mhm.
And and it's not just about what you're potentially trying to escape or run away from or things that you don't like at home. I mean, yes, maybe that can inform what you do want, but I really work with clients to get them very clear on what do they want? What does that vision, of your day-to-day look like? Why are you doing this? Because that is what separates, just a fun trip or a fun journey to I did this for a reason. And it also I think opens up the opportunity for really checking off big life goals for
Mhm.
yourself. I mean, yes, we're focused a lot on the education piece and, as I help families figure out the education options, there is, I make sure for parents to check in with themselves and be like, well, what do you want to get out of this? If you're taking an entire year and doing all of this work to make this happen, what's going to make it worth it for you? Not just seeing my children thrive and, learn new language. Like that's all amazing. Like that's in my mind table stakes. Like that's of course why we're doing this. But
Yeah.
is there, a hobby that you haven't touched in decades or something that you would really love to learn, cooking in Italy or something that goes deeper and fulfills more of those big goals that when you're 80, 90 years old you're going to look back on fondly and say, wow, I can't believe I did that. That was so amazing.
It really sounds like so romantic and brave to me. And I know that there's such a range of options. It just in hearing you talk, I'm thinking, well, a family could choose one place to be for a long time, or they could, really kind of move around, and that may just be like whatever's in sync with their goals, like you said,
Mhm.
and just what feels like more of a logistical fit for people. Like, walk us through some of the options that people choose when they work with you, and then like how school sort of what those options look like too.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a spectrum of options, not only in the duration that you go, but also how quickly you move. And it really comes down to your priorities. I mean, goals and priorities, they kind of go hand in hand. Some families really want to prioritize the exploration, seeing different cultures and hopping around a little bit more. My job is to really balance that, with not going too hard too fast, especially with
Mhm.
kids, because on my journey of seeing all 7 continents in a year, we went fast,
Mm.
and I do not recommend that. I mean, it was great, loved all the experiences. Our priority was just adventure, let's see the world, let's do this. We were in our 30s, had tons of energy, no kids. It was great.
Yeah.
But I would do things very differently now, especially as a parent. So it's really balancing, finding the right balance. And this is different for every family and what their priorities are of what's that right pace that is not too much, but the right balance. And I've worked with some families where they, on one side of the spectrum, they move, they stay in one place and they prioritize weekend trips and,
Mhm.
trips over the school holidays. Cause again, a place like Europe, Europe is always my most popular destination and focus area for clients that I work with, especially families. And so they moved to Switzerland. And this was a situation where she had a job opportunity there for a year and a half. And so what we did was we really prioritized the vacations that they would take, and some of the longer trips, some of the shorter trips, and how do we balance out some bucket list destinations, get a variety, all of that good stuff. And I think that side of the spectrum where you're really living in some place for an extended period of time is good if you want to enroll your child into a school, like a traditional school. There's tons of international schools
Yeah.
that will accept kids. A lot of times, they would want a full year, but sometimes there's exceptions, if you maybe go for half the year, something like that. So that's one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum, they really want to move a lot. The priority is the travel and seeing a wide variety of cultures in different regions. And that's where some options that are, homeschooling, of course, I think most people associate doing something like this with homeschooling. However, there's other options that if you do not want to be the teacher, you don't have to be the teacher. And there's even more options, in the last few years since COVID that has really changed the landscape of online learning.
Hmm.
And obviously, you can talk a bit more about that. But there's, a spectrum of online opportunities. I've heard of some people bringing the tutor slash nanny with them. If you have the means to do that. And somewhere in between those options is there's some programs that have really been catered to digital nomads that want to travel slowly, but still hop around from places to place. And one of those programs that's become quite popular is called Boundless Life. And so their model is they've got hubs in different cities around the world. And there's some that have 1 month programs. But for most of the year, it's 3 month programs. So, that's kind of somewhere in the in between on that spectrum of options.
Yeah, and I think, like, one thing you said was that it's good to sort of start with something small, right? Like I think you said,
Mhm.
try it for a month in the summer, and then without the education piece kind of complicating things, and then maybe work yourself up to a 3-month boundless program, and then maybe think about, staying in a place for a longer period of time. And you mentioned Pacific Preparatory. That is something we have also worked with a range of families doing a range of things with school. And I loved what you said about homeschooling, because I would say, like, I want us to also talk about the what stops people. And I feel like the
Mm,
idea of going from, your traditional life to traveling is huge, in terms of some fears and anxieties. But then the shift from teaching your child along with that, when many of us parents do not want to be in that role, um, is certainly something to think about, like, that may not be the best option. And then something like Pacific Preparatory is a great choice, because you have an actual teacher who's gonna do the live teaching virtually, but that is flexible and that is able to, handle the more traditional, courses, and making sure these kids are ready for reentry when they come back, but that, um, the parent is not in charge of that experience.
absolutely. I would not recommend taking a massive leap to do a year-long trip and learning homeschooling on top of that. That would be too much, I think, for any one person, unless you're very, very passionate and got a lot of time to do
Yeah.
all of that. Good for you. But that would be, I think that the learning curves of both of those things are very high. And one thing I wanna just call out too is that doing a program, whether it's homeschooling or Pacific Preparatory or, something along those lines, I just want to make sure it's clear if nobody's looked into this that that model, we're talking about a few hours a day. We're not
Mhm.
talking, 7 hours a
Yes.
day where we're sitting in front of a computer. Because this is a one-on-one situation, you can compress that education time significantly, so you do have more time to explore and enjoy the destinations that you're in.
Yes, exactly. Like, we had one student who was in Spain, and they were in a democratic school in the afternoon, and they were with Pacific Preparatory in the morning. So they got math and English, and then they were able to do their other subjects in this really immersive school experience that is different from anything else the family had ever seen. And, putting together a program like that really kind of like hits on it reflects back to the goals that these families are wanting from the outset, but it doesn't let go of some of the things that are tying them to, let's call it, the real world, if the goal is obviously to go back to that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, what else kind of stops people, or what else do people need to really consider when they're thinking about a big change like this that you sort of walk them through?
I think the biggest obstacles, aside from school and education, which I feel like we've touched on quite a bit, the job
Yes.
is the
And the
other.
budget.
And the
The budget.
budget, job and budget, yeah. Job, budget, school. Those are, and pets, for some
Oh,
people.
yeah.
Those are kind of the big, let's call them the big 4. So, I'll take it one at a time. For the job, I think that if you're an entrepreneur, you're good. I mean, you can, assuming you, well, let me take a step back. That's, you're good if your business is online. If you have a brick and mortar business, that's a different story. But there's still options even for you in terms of, if this is still your dream, getting some help to run the business while you're gone. There's always a solution for any type of business if that is the goal. A lot of people listening may be in corporate roles like I was. And so if you are in a corporate role, I think getting creative, and also reading the fine print of your employment policy is a good place to start, because there may be opportunities that you didn't even know about. So, for me to take the year long sabbatical, I got a leave of absence from my consulting company. So, I was not paid during that year. However, I still had a job to come home to, which was really nice. And that, because my husband still had to find a job, that at least we knew we were coming back to one income. And so that put our minds at ease. However, you could have a sabbatical program that they just don't talk about and promote very actively. I've seen that happen, unfortunately, quite a bit. Then combining regular paid time off with potentially some unpaid time off. That's a solution to get maybe your month if that's
Mhm.
your goal. The sabbatical leave of absence. You could potentially, especially if you're hitting burnout, look at medical leave. That is something that can be covered for, that's a whole process. But I've known some people who have taken advantage of that, not in a bad way, but like they've needed it.
Yeah.
And I think, if you are hitting burnout, um, and you have help from somebody to plan the trip, I don't recommend having burnout and then trying to plan an adventure on top of that. But
Yeah.
I think that there is something so healing about travel and being in a completely different environment. You change your environment, you change your thoughts, you change your world. And so you can really do some very deep kind of inner work if you are not surrounded by your normal environment, your normal routine that you're no longer following. Like that's a bit jarring.
Mhm.
So there's a time and a place for that too. So that's really the job. And I've taken month-long sabbaticals with PTO sabbatical and also as an entrepreneur. So I kind of help with all of that. So that's the job.
Okay.
The cost. This is actually a really fascinating one. A lot of people are shocked to hear that our year-long trip to all 7 continents, 22 countries, 23 US states, like, it's kind of insane when I say the numbers. It was the same cost as just living in Chicago for the year before that.
No way.
Same cost. I mean, we did a lot of pushing and pulling cost levers, using miles and points,
Uh-huh.
staying with friends and family wherever we could. Those were probably the two biggest things, aside from a really maybe staying in some lower cost accommodations, sometimes hostels, but in private rooms, things like that. But I think when you really break it down, it's not that shocking because we were really just replacing our costs of rent. We were renting at the time, so we just ended our lease, swapping those housing costs for accommodations on the road, swapping our car, for transportation and food. Food is food.
Yeah.
And what we did was we really did a combination of high cost countries with lower cost countries.
Mhm.
And I think that when you break it down and start looking into this, you can realize that it's not as expensive as it may seem. I mean, people, when I say, oh, we went about, probably in the beginning of the podcast, you're like, well, that had to be like hundreds of thousands of dollars,
Yeah,
right?
I do think that's what people think,
Yeah, but
definitely.
it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be. I'm not like we were not shoestring budget travelers by any means. We were probably much more budget than we would be now doing this. But I would say, it can be done for relatively the same cost. I mean, because you have a certain standard of living at home. And
Yes.
so you want to maintain that, especially when traveling with kids.
Mhm.
You're probably not going to be staying at the Four Seasons for an entire year, but you can certainly do those splurges, and really it's just about balancing your costs, and things do just kind of balance out when you push and pull those cost levers. So that's one of my favorite things to work with clients on, and they're usually very surprised by how how much less it can be compared to their perception or initial thoughts of it. And especially, um, the slower you travel, the less it will cost,
Yeah.
because you're doing less moving around and all of that. So
Yeah, and you're
that's
cooking more versus going out, yeah,
yeah, I
all of
mean,
those
you're
things.
still living your regular life. Like, you're probably
Yeah,
not going out to eat. It's very different than a vacation. So
right.
you can't just take whatever let's say you take a, 1-2 week big trip every year. It's not that times like 52. Because
Yes,
you're all
yes,
you're moving, that would include round trip flights, every
right.
week. Like, that's just, you're working on a very different scale. So it requires a very different and bigger shift of how you see costs,
Mhm.
and how you see travel, honestly, because it's you're not going to be traveling like you're on vacation. And I don't recommend that from a pacing standpoint, obviously from a cost standpoint,
Yeah.
so many things. So it does require just that shift. So that's costs. And then, sorry, did you have a question on
No,
costs?
go ahead,
Okay,
and then I'll
I was
ask,
just
yeah.
gonna cover pets real quick,
Yes, let's not forget about the poor
because
little
I
cats
know
and
that
dogs.
honestly, I've talked to so many people. They're like, I would totally do this, but I have, especially aging,
Yeah.
so you a couple of the bigger factors are like aging pets, because I have known, like, friends and other people who travel with their pets, so that's very possible. Depends on the country that, or destination that you are looking at. Each country has different requirements. Um, so that's a big factor. Bigger dogs are unfortunately a bit harder because they can't go in the plane with you. So there are some very creative ways to, especially if you want to get them overseas. There's literally a boat. There are certain flights that are
Oh,
just for
yeah.
pets. I mean,
Okay.
these are not cheap options,
Right.
but they are options. So, I think it could be worth it if you were looking for a longer adventure, like a year.
Mhm.
If you're looking at a month, if you can give them to a family or friend that loves them, I think that could put you at ease. And it is hard. I mean, pets are like little fur babies,
Yeah, they're
and
part of the family for
right.
sure.
And
I can
so
see, yeah, that's a big factor.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's options there as well.
Okay. Well, and the other thing that I thought that we should chat about is perhaps a growing trend that we're seeing in people wanting to actually relocate internationally.
Mhm.
Um, that's something you said you might have statistics for us on that. I'd love
Yes,
to hear. Is
I
that
do.
do we just have a general perception that people are talking about this, or is it actually happening?
There was a study that was done, 6,300 this is specifically for Americans.
Mhm.
They did this study at 3 different times. So once in August 2024, once right after the election, in
Mhm.
November, and then in February. And the one a couple I'll just say a couple of the statistics. So one of like the biggest numbers that really stood out to me was that 68% of Americans feel like they're merely surviving instead of thriving.
Mm.
And that's not a great statistic. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the reasons why 42%, and this is across generations, 42% have considered or plan to relocate outside of the US. That percentage is higher, 63% Gen Z, 52% millennials. So it is not just a certainly it's, a tangential trend I've seen, especially on Instagram. And, you figure, yes, that probably is increasing, but this study really shows that by the numbers, it is increasing. And, about 1 in 5 of those people that were considering are really seriously considering it. So I think that, regardless of politics, it's, sometimes there are moments that are going to push you towards something that you've wanted for a long time. And I think you need to follow that nudge, because if you've been thinking about doing something like this for months, years, it's clearly not going away. So
Yep.
I think that it's one of those things where you need to not push that down, even because I know it's hard. I know it's uncomfortable, and it's honestly a lot of work to do something that most people don't do.
Mhm.
However, I can tell you from experience being on the other side, it's so worth it. I mean, that year that we took is by far some of my favorite memories. It really fast tracked the relationship and marriage that I have. I mean, you're together 24/7
Yep.
versus just, a few hours in your weekdays, few hours in the morning and the evening, and weekends. It's a very different lifestyle. And I think that there's so much good that can come from it. And I think that you owe it to yourself. If it's something that you've really been feeling called to, at least give yourself the the gift of looking into it and
Yeah.
seeing what it's all about. And I think that and I hope that this conversation has showed you that it is something that is possible. Sure, it's maybe not normal,
Yep.
but if it's something that you're really drawn to, and certainly it's not for everybody, but if you are being drawn to it, you're being drawn to it for a reason, because you could get something out of it. And it's really up to you to kind of keep just, digging a little bit more, researching, and certainly you can talk to me and I would love to figure out your specific situation.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the theme is that, like, you don't have to go all in. Like, again, it's like you can take little steps, even if your ultimate goal might be to actually relocate. That there's
Mhm.
many steps along the way that you can take to test it out and to see if it feels like a fit. And I love, like, I picture when you're working with families that you're like, it's like whack-a-mole. You're like, okay, give me all of your fears, all of your reservations, all of these obstacles, and like, let's whack them one at a time. And,
Yes.
just the thing you just said about the budget, I'm like, oh, wow. Like, I just never had considered that it could be affordable. It's not like a 12-month vacation that you're
Mhm.
used to. I needed that like reorienting. But yeah, I can see why, like, following the little voice inside directly to you or someone in your field to like
Mhm.
just kind of walk you through what are the challenges and like how can we address each of them to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. Okay. Well, Susie, I knew this was going to be fascinating. And I want to make sure that we get to our new segment, Forget This, Try That, because I feel like this whole conversation has been Forget This, Try That. But what would be your takeaway? What's something that we need to kind of leave behind and then replace it with in terms of our parenting or our education?
Yeah, and I think it really is a good next step for this conversation because my my recommendation if you are being called to this is, you know, forget the idea that you need to rip off the band-aid, take this big leap and do it all at once, whether that's moving abroad or taking a year-long adventure. Test it out. You can go step by step. And what I recommend as a good first step is taking a month-long trip in the summer, especially if your kids are in school. Stakes are low. You don't have to worry about education. And instead of swapping your expensive summer camps at home, you can do summer camps in amazing places all over the world. And usually they're at a much lower cost than those, especially if you're listening and you live in the States.
Yeah.
That is not only a savings there, but also a cool opportunity for the kids to be exposed to other cultures because a lot of these camps draw in international groups of kids. And
Mhm.
so that alone is a really cool cultural experience. And usually they do really fun, adventurous things that you might not want to do.
Yep.
If you have the ability to, let's say, take off a month using some of the strategies that I had just mentioned, awesome. Then you can get a summer vacation, summer camp essentially yourself, where you can have some time to really focus on yourself. But also, if you can't do that, but maybe you have a remote job, having that camp coverage is very similar as it is at home. Obviously, depending on where you choose, factor in time zones for meetings and things like that. But I think that that's a really good first step, and you don't have to worry about visas or any red tape or things like that. But especially if you're thinking about moving someplace more permanently or even temporarily, let's say for a year, I recommend minimum of a month to stay in that place to really get to experience it. Just visiting someplace for even let's say a week. Yeah, you can love it and fall in love and say, "Oh, I wish I could live here." It's very different than if you're spending an extended period of time in, let's say one home rental. And the one other thing that I do want to call out, and this is related to costs with this whole idea, is if you are doing this in a slow way, as I recommend, is that the cost of a month long stay is usually very similar to, let's say, a 2-week vacation. Because if you're staying, if you're going to be staying in one place for a month, you're probably not going to be staying in a hotel. A home
Right.
is much, especially with kids, it's much more comfortable. There are monthly discounts that can be very significant. Some of these discounts I've even seen where the price of 8 nights is the same as 30 nights. And I don't know
Wow.
about you, but I'd
Okay.
rather stay someplace for 30 nights
Yes,
because
absolutely.
it's a win-win. They don't have to turn over and find, tenants, guests for all of these little, patchwork of guests and getting the
Yeah.
cleaning crew. And, so it makes sense that there is a monthly discount. And a lot of times it can be quite significant. So that, if cost is kind of something that's a concern, a lot of times it is truly that swap.
Yeah.
So I think
Okay.
that it's a great little first step. It's still a stretch, and I do help people, with just this month long, adventure because there's still, you gotta figure out what do you do with the mail and like all these little
Yep.
things. But you're not selling your house or anything major. But it's just, dipping your toes in, seeing how the water is, and if it's a good fit for your family to do something even bigger next time.
Yep. I love it. I love it. I think people are going to be knocking down your door now, Susie. So tell everyone where they can find you. on the webs?
Yes, I am most active on Instagram at Carpe Diem Traveler, like seize the day, Carpe Diem. And on LinkedIn, you can just find me at Susie Chow.
That's where I found you on
Yes,
LinkedIn. So,
yes.
oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I think it fits perfectly in our theme of forget what you learned, like do things differently, go be bold to really tap into, like you said, that inner voice that's telling you this is not working. Let's try something different and disrupt our pattern in our family life. So, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Forget What You Learned, hosted by me, Corey Greenberg. As always, our goal is to allow you to zoom out on the snapshot of your family's life and answer the question, are my kids thriving? We're here to inspire you to make those small and maybe big changes to answer yes. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Pacific Preparatory, an organization committed to educating students with an innovative and holistic approach in today's digital world. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave a rating and review. See you next time.